moment. Well, I have a question for the panel. What I find interesting and this in particular within a suburban context or outside of an urban area, how do you convince people that streets can be used for things other than the automobile? That it's safe, that there are destinations, that it's an appropriate place for their children to start using streets for other forms of active transportation.
Would you like me to start?
Sure, please.
I loved the Summer Streets program. I think it's a good example. We're doing we have a car-free project coming up on St. Clair. But I think, again, showing people that, and you don't have to over-program. You don't have to have all sorts of events. It can just be a celebration of being on the street or different people using the street. And making it as easy as possible for citizens, in fact, to access that process is critical. And that's something that I think local governments have really got to do more on stepping up to the plate on that.
Christopher?
I think we have a challenge in dissemination of the information that's out there, because I think there's some examples of streets or even some cities within our own country. I don't think we have to actually have a look at it. Looking abroad internationally is good, but I think there are some great examples within Canada. We've mentioned Car-Free Day, but there's also, just on a day-to-day basis within our downtowns, we have a lot of people using them. We have a high-level split of alternative modes that come into our downtowns, and people walk to their destinations at one point. Even if they're parking on the fringe area of the downtown, parking their cars on the fringe area of the downtowns, they're still using those streets, using the sidewalks, and seeing the importance of those wide sidewalks that are out there. So it's, I think the challenge again is having to getting people to relate their experiences that they live every day on how they can apply that at home and where they live.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of it is that you've got to build the examples first for people to start using them. And in traditional suburban cases, the roads were always designed at 66 feet, 20 meters, which can be grossly oversized depending on the nature of the community you're in. But trying to convince people that there is an alternative that could be smaller, tighter, more compact, allow on-street parking, better tree canopy, is really tough sometimes. Every municipality, certainly in Ontario, sets its own standards, its own public works standards. So you can have a certain innovative standard in one community and just drive across to the next one, and then it's like 1975 again. So it's a really interesting challenge, but I think the examples are there. We'll start over here.
I wanted to address that too, because I think that there's a perception because there's no facilities that people are not walking and biking in those places, but usually they are. And usually what you can do is you can look for those tramped places in the grass, those little the technical term in the engineering profession is goat trail, just so you know. I call them homemade pedestrian facilities. Look for those and take pictures of them and say, well, there are people walking here. Spend an hour at some place, often near a strip shopping center, and you will see people walking. You'll see people waiting for the bus. Recently, I had a call from National Public Radio because we were doing this pedestrian safety story, and they wanted to see someplace. And I just took her down to Route 1 in Virginia, a suburban area outside of D.C. And within about a minute and a half, we saw probably, by the time we were probably there for half an hour, we probably saw 15 people coming to wait at a bus stop where there was no shelter, there was no crossing, there was nothing. All these people running across the road. Low income areas, there are people out there. There are a lot of immigrant families, people who don't have a lot of transportation choice. They're on bikes. They're taking the buses in those places. And so the first thing to do is to challenge the concept that these places
staff on this, and then you should, in fact, be going up to either your state level or, in our case, the province level, seeking those legislative supports, changes to the highway traffic.
Just take a short answer.
Yeah, well, because I keep on thinking that half of our work is a communication exercise.
Yeah.
I'm part of an organization called Project Walk, which a couple of people in this room are also part of. But we're trying to figure out, okay, what is the trigger that makes somebody walk or cycle? And a study that I love is in Copenhagen, where they've gone from very little cycling to an extraordinary amount of cycling. They asked people, why do they cycle? 2% of them answered some form of a environmental, moral, ethical reason. 98% of them was about quality of life, because in some way it improved their quality of life. And I think that that's where we have to start building our arguments. That's what's going to be the turning point, and that's how we have to start designing the spaces.
We got a lot of choices. We got to start using them. Barbara, by the way, the Goat Trails landscape architects refer to them as desire lines.
Oh, yes, I put that too, desire lines.
So we're going to go out to the audience, please.
I have a question mainly for Barbara, and thanks so much. It was an excellent presentation. I particularly liked the section on best practices and the focus on implementation. So I was hoping you could elaborate. In particular, I think it's really important the stuff that you mentioned, that is identifying all the various procedures, policies, and programs that need to integrate and incorporate complete streets, so that all decision making can be aligned and coordinated from the planning to the capital works and the implementation. But do you have any further stories or lessons learned regarding how to operationalize that? You mentioned there's some best practices where the training goes as far as utilities and contractors. So I'm just really interested in hearing more about how to operationalize. Once you have integrated it, how do you make sure that the training, the decisions, the actual implementation is flowing throughout the organization?
Well, most places that have done that really have created a whole new process system. Usually the first step, and actually there was just last week or earlier this week, there was a meeting in Chicago. They have a complete streets policy where they had hired a consultant to figure out all of the documents that they need to change, and that's their rules for utility easements and water lines and just you name it, their transit plans, their bicycle plans, just all kinds of different documents, their signage rules, and they make a huge list of everything that they're going to now systematically go back and change. So look through, figure out what needs to change in those, and then have the committee work on that. Most places that are really doing police streets have changed their decision-making process, and unfortunately I was doing an interview, so I missed the Charlotte presentation, but can you talk about the 6-step process probably, right? So that kind of thing where you really just upend what your initial process is really important to changing things. And some places have started with meetings. Seattle is a great example where pretty much every time they have a big project, they bring in everybody that you can imagine: the utilities people, the people who work in their city accessibility office, the transit folks, just everyone you can imagine. And they say, okay, we're going to redo 4th Avenue downtown, and people, we've been wanting to do something there, and everybody in the room gets a chance to contribute to it. So I think setting up some of those processes, to change my language, would be is really, really essential.
Great, thank you.
Oh yeah, I'd like to get back actually to more rural areas, as you mentioned earlier, because it is more difficult when you don't have the kind of structure at the municipality that supports any of this. I mean, the municipality is very much about snowmobiling and ATVs, right, and pickup trucks. So I feel that like the new Ontario provincial policy
it's a little oblique. What I would like to do is rephrase it, because I think where you started on that's a whole conference, that discussion. In smaller communities, you were saying that it's much more difficult to galvanize support and so on. And I'm just wondering what the experience of our panel would be in much smaller communities that really may not have a history of the level of active transportation we're talking about right now. Although it's interesting because it's somewhat contradictory in that many older communities, the cores of small villages, hamlets, towns, are actually incredibly conducive to walking and bicycling. But very quickly, when you get out of that little tiny ring that's been built over the last 150 years, you're much more into a suburban model, which is and still in a small village and community. I'm wondering if anyone on our panel has had experience of it. That's okay.
Sure, and I'm sure I'll be challenged on my definition of complete streets in a minute as well. No, but I keep on thinking of complete streets is a little bit like a nutritious meal. There's 100 recipes or 1,000 recipes. They're entirely context specific. It depends on the time of the day, who's eating it, your personal diet. You know, the mix can be completely different. And you know, to your point, I did the downtown plan for the city of Iqaluit and had the challenge and honor of designing dog sled trails all the way up to the legislature, because they know right in the middle of downtown. I had never done that one before. But it's I think that the particular mix is, as I say, is kind of entirely context specific. You're really talking about, you know, what is happening outside, who's walking around there, what are the stakeholders, who are the players, and who's willing to